The night was alive with smoke and sound. Somewhere in a cramped Chicago club, the air trembled with a single note, a harmonica crying through an amplifier like a saxophone wailing for mercy. The crowd, black and white, pressed together past the rope that once divided them, all moving to one rhythm that refused to be tamed. He didn't invent the blues, but he electrified it, gave it a heartbeat that still echoes under city lights. They called him Little Walter, a young man who turned a small pocket harp into the sound of rebellion. What happens when someone changes the music forever, yet can't escape the silence within himself? Let's get into his story right now. Let me know where you're watching this from in the comments. Grab yourself a warm drink, maybe a cup of water or tea, sit back, and let's start this journey together. Before there was fame, before the lights, there was a boy with a broken home and a harmonica that cost less than a loaf of bread. Marion Walter Jacobs was born on the 1st of May, 1930, in Marksville, Louisiana, though later, when he applied for a Social Security card in 1940, his birth year was listed as 1923. He came into the world with no birth certificate, no promise, and no map. His parents separated before he was even born. Back then, having a child out of wedlock was a sin that could tear families apart. His mother, still young and afraid of her own parents' judgment, left him behind not out of cruelty, but because she had no choice. His father took him to live with relatives in Alexandria, on a small farm that carried more silence than comfort. It was there, surrounded by fields and the hum of cicadas, that Walter first learned how sound could fill an empty space. His father, a half-black, half-Indian man, could play anything with strings or keys, guitar, accordion, violin, even the harp. The gift was in his blood, though the world gave him little chance to use it. After his father went to prison for killing his sister's boyfriend, the boy was raised by an uncle and aunt who soon faced prison themselves. By 8 years old, Walter was left to find music on his own. The harmonica, or harp, as they called it, became his escape. He would listen to the radio late at night, drawn to the hillbilly and blues sounds of Lonnie Glosson and the early masters of Southern music. He couldn't afford a saxophone, but he could afford a harp. Cheap, small, but full of soul. He played until his fingers bled, until he broke them apart and tried to fix them again. Each repaired harmonica taught him more about tone, about breath, about control. The Great Depression had left its mark on the South. Poverty, segregation, and quiet anger filled the streets. Walter was growing fast, too fast. By 12, he was acting grown, chasing older women, getting into fights, and dreaming of leaving Louisiana behind. His grandfather sent him to stay with family in New Orleans, but what he found there wasn't comfort, it was abuse, so he ran. He jumped a freight train heading north, following the same invisible tracks that carried thousands of black families away from the South during the Great Migration. No luggage, no plan, just a harmonica and a hunger for something more. His first stop was Helena, Arkansas, a small town pulsing with jukebox blues. It was there he heard the music of John Lee Sonny Boy Williamson, a harmonica legend whose voice poured out of diners and bars. That sound became his North Star. In Helena, he met a man calling himself Rice Miller, who was performing under the same name, Sonny Boy Williamson. Miller took Walter under his wing, teaching him tricks, introducing him to the life of a traveling musician. Together, they performed around the South in St. Louis, Mississippi, Memphis learning from players like Robert Jr., Lockwood, Sunnyland Slim, and Honey Boy Edwards. Honey Boy and Walter became inseparable. They rode trains together, slept wherever they could, and played on street corners for change. The music kept them alive. By 1945, Walter was just 14 when he finally made it to Chicago, the promised land for every bluesman of his time. Chicago was alive with possibility, smoke-filled bars, open-air markets, and the hum of electric guitars spilling into the night. He got a job in a laundry, but the street corners paid better. On Maxwell Street, he played his harmonica for crowds of factory workers and housewives passing by. Every note earned him a few coins and a little more respect. He began to pick up the guitar, trying to understand how to blend rhythm and melody the way the older musicians did. By 16, he had already recorded a demo, I Just Keep Loving Her, under the name Little Walter J. It didn't make him famous, but it made people notice. Then, at 17, fate introduced him to a man who would change his life, Muddy Waters, a bluesman twice his age, who was already becoming a legend in Chicago. Muddy had built a reputation playing electric guitar, bringing Delta blues into the modern world. When his guitarist Jimmy Rogers introduced the young harmonica player, Muddy heard something new, something raw, sharp, and impossible to ignore. He invited Walter to join his band, the Headhunters, a group that practiced until their fingers cramped and played in every club that would have them. Together, they fought their way through the smoky bars of Chicago, challenging other bands, claiming stages, and reshaping the sound of urban blues. By the late 1940s, they had become regulars at clubs owned by two brothers, Leonard and Phil Chess, who would soon rename their label Chess Records. It was here, in those sweaty sessions, that the Chicago blues was born. And somewhere between those long nights and louder amps, the boy from Louisiana, the one who ran away on a train with nothing but a harp, began to transform into the man the world would remember as Little Walter. Chicago in the late 1940s was loud, alive, and hungry for something new. Streetcars clattered past neon bars, and inside, the sound of electric guitars was changing everything. Little Walter, still a teenager, found himself in the center of it all. He wasn't the biggest name, not yet, but every time he lifted that harmonica to his lips, people stopped talking. The air seemed to pause, waiting for that first note. With Muddy Waters' band, Walter learned how to survive the nightlife. The band played for long hours in clubs where the smoke was thicker than the applause. They'd walk into a bar, challenge another group, and battle for the right to keep the stage. Whoever moved the crowd got the night's pay. For Walter, this was more than a contest, it was a calling. He wanted his sound to cut through the noise, to stand out among the guitars, drums, and voices that filled every corner of Chicago. But there was a problem. No one could hear him. The harmonica, small and delicate, was easily drowned out by the new electric instruments. Walter didn't accept that. One night, he grabbed a microphone and cupped it in his hands as he played through a guitar amplifier. The result was rough at first, a distorted roar, part human, part machine, but it was electric in every sense of the word. That moment changed blues forever. For the first time, the harmonica had power. It could sing, shout, and scream like a saxophone or a trumpet. It could carry emotion across a crowded room. Walter had found the sound that would define him, the amplified blues harp. People started to notice. Musicians leaned in, trying to figure out what he'd done. Club owners asked for the kid with the loud harp. Soon, Walter's solos became the highlight of Muddy's sets. His phrasing was bold, his timing unpredictable. He breathed through the instrument as if it were an extension of his own body. Big Walter, Shaky Horton, one of Chicago's most respected players, took him aside one night and showed him how to master his breath control, how to make the instrument weep and whisper. Walter learned fast, too fast. Within months, he was outplaying the men who had inspired him. By 1950, Muddy's band had become one of the tightest units in the city. Muddy on guitar, Jimmy Rogers on rhythm, Big Crawford on bass, Babyface Leroy on drums, and Little Walter on harmonica. Their chemistry was unmatched. Crowds followed them from club to club, and wherever they played, the room would shake. Walter wasn't drinking yet. His favorite drink was RC Cola. But the fire inside him was already growing. He wanted to be heard not just as part of a band, but as an artist of his own. During one of Muddy's recording sessions at Chess, he played a raw, wordless track built entirely around his harmonica. The song had no title, no lyrics, just breath and rhythm, but Leonard Chess couldn't forget it. It would soon be called Juke. When Leonard Chess first heard that harmonica instrumental, he wasn't sure what to do with it. It didn't sound like anything else on the radio. There were no lyrics, no hook, just a young man's breath turning metal and air into fire. He shelved the track for a while, unsure if anyone would buy a record built only on a harmonica. But one afternoon, Leonard played it through the open windows of the studio. People on the street stopped. A group of women began to dance right there on the sidewalk, drawn to the rhythm. That was all the proof he needed. He renamed the track Juke, pressed it on Checker Records, and within a week, it was everywhere. Juke shot to #1 on the Billboard R&B chart and stayed there for 8 straight weeks, holding its place for a total of 20. It became the biggest hit in the history of Chess Records, bigger than Muddy Waters, bigger than Howlin' Wolf, bigger than Etta James or Chuck Berry. No one had ever heard a harmonica sound like that before. That song didn't just make Little Walter famous, it changed the instrument forever. Every harmonica player who came after would have to walk in his shadow. From that moment, Walter wasn't just a sideman. He was a star. With fame came freedom and friction. The success of Juke brought tension between Walter and Muddy Waters. Money, credit, and pride began to get in the way. Walter wanted to lead his own band, to play on his own terms. Muddy, twice his age, tried to guide him, but little Walter was too young and too wild to be managed. Eventually, he left Muddy's group, taking his own musicians on the road. He named his new band the Jukes, a tribute to the song that made him. They hit the circuit hard clubs, theaters, juke joints, and Walter became the main attraction. His style was showy, bold, magnetic. He played the harmonica like it was alive, bending notes, shouting through the reed plates, using the microphone like a weapon and a dance partner. In 1955, he struck gold again with My Babe, a song written by the legendary Willie Dixon. Smooth, soulful, and irresistible, it knocked Ray Charles's I Got a Woman off the top of the R&B chart, holding #1 for 5 weeks. Willie Dixon had written it just for Walter, a song about temptation, about pride, about a man who couldn't help but want what he shouldn't. It fit him perfectly. Hit after hit followed. Blues with a Feeling, Sad Hours, Mean Old World, You Better Watch Yourself. Each one carried that unmistakable sound, the amplifier's growl, the sharp inhale, the heartbreak in every breath. His 1,958 collection, The Best of Little Walter, sealed his legacy as the face of modern electric blues. At the height of his fame, the world seemed to revolve around him. Chess Records was booming, and its nickname Cadillac Records came true. Every artist drove one. Harmonica prices soared from a few cents to hundreds of dollars because everyone wanted to sound like him. Crowds packed every club he played, sometimes fighting just to get inside. But fame, for Walter, was a dangerous thing. Beneath the applause was a restlessness that never went away. He'd achieved everything he dreamed, of money, music, recognition, yet he couldn't find peace. The same fire that made him great was starting to burn out of control, and behind him, in the shadows of those bright Chicago lights, something darker was waiting the beginning of his fall. By the mid-1950, Little Walter had become a living legend. His harmonica was no longer just an instrument. It was a voice that defined Chicago itself. Every club on the South Side echoed with his sound, and every musician wanted to capture the same magic. At Chess Records, success was measured in Cadillacs. Artists who made hits were rewarded with gleaming cars and pockets full of cash. Walter had both. He rode through Chicago with his windows down, the city lights reflecting off his chrome. Crowds followed his every move. Women adored him. Musicians envied him. To the world, he was untouchable, the young genius who made the blues electric. Inside the studio, Walter worked like a man possessed. He would record for hours, chasing a tone only he could hear. When the microphone hissed, he turned it into part of the music. When an amp cracked, he used the distortion as texture. He pushed the limits of technology and turned imperfection into art. Every note carried defiance, a refusal to be quiet, a refusal to be ordinary. His influence spread far beyond Chicago. Across the Atlantic, young British musicians were listening. The Rolling Stones, the Beatles, Eric Clapton, and even Elvis Presley were studying his records, learning how to give their own music that same raw, human edge. Mick Jagger once said he wanted his harmonica to sound as mean as Little Walter's. Walter's live shows were unforgettable. He would step onto the stage, microphone in one hand, harmonica in the other, and close his eyes. Then, like a storm breaking loose, he'd fill the room with sound deep, dark, and alive. The first breath would silence the crowd, the second would set them free. People swayed, shouted, cried. The power wasn't just in his music, it was in the way he made people feel seen. He shared stages with giants Muddy Waters, Howlin' Wolf, B.B. King, and Ray Charles. But even among legends, Walter stood apart. His harmonica wasn't an accessory, it was the lead voice. When he played, guitars and drums bent around him, following his pulse. He could make the harmonica growl like thunder or whisper like a prayer. Racial lines blurred wherever he performed. In a time when ropes still divided dance floors by color, the music would always win. The crowd would pull together until the barrier fell, and black and white faces moved as one. Even the police, watching from the door, couldn't stop it. In those moments, music did what laws couldn't. It united people. The press began calling him the Prince of the Chicago Blues. Chess executives treated him like gold. His records were selling, his tours were full, and his name was spoken with the kind of reverence usually reserved for saints or sinners. Sometimes both. But beneath the success, Walter's fire never cooled. He carried his harmonica and his gun with the same confidence. He'd grown used to the streets and the danger that came with them. Fame didn't change that, it just gave him more reasons to protect himself. For now, though, the spotlight was still his. The applause was still loud. The harmonica still screamed his name. And for a few golden years, little Walter stood at the top of the world, the sound of the city, the heartbeat of the blues, and the young man who made music feel immortal. Fame had given little Walter everything he thought he wanted: money, women, cars, respect. But success in the blues always came with a price. Behind every roaring crowd and flashing Cadillac grille, something darker followed him, waiting for a chance to take it all back. The wild nights grew wilder. Walter was young, rich, and restless. He carried a gun everywhere he went, tucked inside the amplifier he used on stage. The city loved him, but Chicago in those years was a hard place, full of hustlers, jealous musicians, and cops who didn't care who you were once the show was over. Fights broke out almost nightly, and Walter was always in the middle of them. At first, he didn't drink. His friends remembered him sipping sodas between sets: RC Cola, 7-Up, Pepsi. But fame changes a man's rhythm. The more he traveled, the more the nights blurred together, and the bottle soon became his closest friend. Women followed him everywhere. Some adored him, others feared him. He had a temper that burned fast, and when mixed with whiskey and pride, it could turn any small slight into a storm. Old photos of him show the story written across his face, scars along his cheeks, a shadow behind his smile. His band members came and went. They loved his talent but couldn't handle his moods. He was generous one day and dangerous the next. Money disappeared, shows fell apart, and sometimes the fights backstage were worse than the ones in the clubs. There were other kinds of danger, too. Jealous husbands, furious boyfriends. Walter never backed down. He'd rather fight than walk away, and the streets remembered his name for it. One girlfriend struck him in the face with a wine bottle. Another shot him in the leg. He limped for the rest of his life. Still, he refused to slow down. He toured relentlessly, tearing up one Cadillac after another, demanding new ones from Chess Records when the old ones broke down. The label kept giving them to him, taking the cost out of his royalties. He didn't care. He just wanted to keep moving. Even at his height, the trouble never stopped. Police beatings left him bloodied more than once. One night, after a street altercation, officers smashed his head open with their nightsticks and left him lying in the road. The doctors warned him he might not survive another blow, but he walked out of the hospital and went straight back to performing swollen, dizzy, and still playing like his life depended on it. He said once, "If I stop playing, I'll die." Maybe he knew something the rest of the world didn't. By the late 1950s, his fame began to flicker. The blues was losing ground to rock and roll, and younger audiences were chasing new idols. But Walter didn't notice the change, or maybe he refused to see it. He was still the man who had made the harmonica scream, how could the world ever move on without him? He kept chasing the stage lights, even as they began to fade. The genius who once brought the blues to life was now running from his own shadow. And while the applause still echoed in every club he entered, so did the whispers that little Walter was burning out. One song, one drink, one fight at a time. By the early 1960s, the man who once defined the Chicago sound was slipping into chaos. Little Walter had lived hard and fast, and now the life he built was starting to crumble beneath him. The applause that once greeted him had grown quieter. The crowds that used to fight to get into his shows were thinning out. Rock and roll had taken over. The radio no longer played the old blues records that once carried his name. Young audiences wanted something new, something faster, flashier, and Walter, who had always been ahead of his time, suddenly found himself behind it. He didn't handle the change well. The frustration that had always simmered inside him now boiled over. He drank more, fought more, and trusted no one. The same streets that had once cheered for him now whispered stories of his downfall. The accidents came one after another: car wrecks, street fights, nights that ended in blood. He'd show up to gigs, bruised and swollen, sometimes bandaged, sometimes limping. But no matter how bad it got, he always performed. The stage was the only place where he still felt alive. One night, he was beaten so badly by police that his skull was cracked open. They found him in his car, barely conscious, covered in blood. The doctors told him he was permanently damaged, that another head injury could kill him. He didn't listen. Within days, he was back under the stage lights, pressing the harmonica to his lips as if he could blow the pain away. Friends began to worry. The old charm that once drew people to him had hardened into paranoia. He'd pull a gun on anyone who crossed him, sometimes over money, sometimes over pride, sometimes over nothing at all. The women in his life saw the worst of it. Lovers became enemies. Arguments turned violent. One woman hit him in the face with a bottle. Another shot him in the leg. That wound left him with a limp, and it never fully healed. The man who once walked with swagger now dragged his foot across the stage. He hated it. He said it made him feel half a man. The more he drank, the more his playing changed. His tone, once smooth and sharp, grew rough and uneven. His breath control, once perfect, began to falter. Each note sounded heavier, like it was carrying the weight of his life. He started taking heroin, chasing the same rush he once got from applause. The drugs dulled the pain but stole his focus. He'd fall asleep mid-rehearsal, forget lyrics, or miss cues on stage. His bandmates came and went, tired of his temper, his debt, his violence. The man who had made the harmonica roar was fading, and he knew it, but he wouldn't stop. He couldn't. "If I stop," he once told a friend, "then it's over, and I ain't ready to go yet." But the truth was, the end was already waiting closer than he could see. The late 1950 had turned into the early 1960, and little Walter was running out of time. His talent was still there, raw, untamed, but his body could no longer keep up with his spirit. Every drink, every fight, every sleepless night carved another line into his face. Rock and roll had taken over America. Teenagers were dancing to Chuck Berry, Elvis Presley, and Little Richard, some of them artists who had learned from him but now left him behind. Walter's records stopped selling. His royalties were shrinking. He felt betrayed by the same industry he helped build. When Chess Records refused to buy him another Cadillac, Walter drove his own car straight into Leonard Chess's office door, demanding a new one. The story became legend on the South Side, part truth, part warning. He was losing control. He couldn't find peace in Chicago anymore. Club owners feared him. Musicians avoided him. He'd show up drunk, armed, ready for trouble. When he couldn't get gigs in the city, he looked overseas. Europe, they said, still loved the blues. And so he packed up his harmonica and took the sound of Chicago to London, Paris, and beyond. In 1964, he toured Europe alongside the Rolling Stones, who considered him a hero. For a while, it felt like redemption. The crowds were full again, the applause was loud, and he was treated like royalty. But even oceans away, his demons followed. He drank too much gin, too much rum. On stage, he was unpredictable. Brilliant one night, incoherent the next. Musicians told stories of him drinking an entire bottle before a show, playing until he collapsed, and then demanding to go back on. One night, he got into an argument with Rod Stewart and pulled a knife on him. Stewart survived the story. Walter survived the shame. He told people he hated London, said they didn't appreciate him there. Maybe what he really hated was seeing how far the blues had traveled without him. When he came back to Chicago after his second European tour in 1967, the city had changed. His old haunts were gone. Younger musicians were playing louder, faster, cleaner. Walter's harmonica no longer sounded sharp. It wavered, cracked, ran out of breath. Fans noticed. Some whispered that he'd lost his touch. Others just felt sad watching him struggle to find it again. He'd stand on stage, his eyes half closed, his face swollen from old beatings, and still he'd play. The sound that once shook the world was now quieter, weaker, but it was still his. It was all he had left. By then, he was only in his 30s, but he looked twice his age. The nights had taken their toll. He'd cough between sets, his lungs shot from years of smoke and exhaustion. He'd pass out before the encore, and his friends would carry him backstage like a fallen boxer. He was no longer chasing fame. He was chasing survival, one gig, one drink, one breath at a time. And though the crowds were smaller and the stages dimmer, little Walter never stopped playing, because deep down he knew the truth. Without the music, there was nothing left of him at all. On the 15th of February, 1968, Chicago woke to another cold morning, gray and silent. Somewhere on the south side, in a small apartment belonging to his girlfriend, little Walter lay still. He was only 37 years old. No one knows for sure what happened that night. The stories changed depending on who told them. Some said it started over a dice game. Others swore it was a fight with a jealous man or a friend who'd hit him with a pipe. A few believed he'd been robbed. But they all agreed on one thing: Walter went home with a headache and never woke up again. There was no police investigation, no autopsy. The official report said coronary thrombosis, a blood clot in the heart. It sounded clinical, detached, far too quiet for a man whose life had been so loud. When his family came to claim his body, they found almost nothing left. His jewelry was gone. His amps were gone. Even his Cadillac had disappeared. His sisters demanded answers, but the people around him just shrugged. The blues scene moved fast, and so did the people who took advantage of it. The funeral was chaotic. Dozens of musicians came to pay their respects. Muddy Waters, B.B., King, Honey Boy Edwards, men who owed their sound to the boy from Louisiana who had taught the harmonica to sing. But grief turned to anger before the service was done. One of Walter's sisters accused people in the room of abandoning him, of standing by while he destroyed himself. Some said she struck Muddy in the face. The pain in that room ran deeper than words. Leonard Chess helped pay for the funeral, but his family still had to fight for the royalties Walter was owed. Years of unpaid earnings had vanished into record contracts and deductions for Cadillacs and advances. Eventually, his sister hired lawyers and sued Chess Records. They won a settlement, but it was small comfort. Walter was buried in St. Mary's Cemetery in Evergreen Park, Illinois. For more than 20 years, his grave remained unmarked. Fans who came to pay tribute couldn't even find the spot. Only in 1991, after loyal admirers raised money, was a proper headstone placed on his resting place, a simple stone for a complicated man. He had one daughter, Marion Diaz Rico, though his family doubted she was really his. The courts ruled in her favor, granting her rights to his estate, which was later valued in the millions. Even in death, Walter's story remained tangled in mystery and conflict. In the years after his passing, time began to soften the headlines and heal the wounds. Musicians started to rediscover him. Radio stations played Juke again, marveling at how modern it still sounded. Young harmonica players, black, white, American, and European, treated his recordings like sacred scripture. His music began to travel in ways his body never could. Across the ocean, in England, Germany, and France, new generations of artists studied his phrasing, his tone, his breath. They called him the Mozart of the blues harp, and they were right. Little Walter had lived like a man running out of time, but his sound, that wild, electrified cry, refused to die with him. As years passed, America began to look back on Little Walter with new eyes. The chaos of his life slowly gave way to the clarity of his art. What once looked like rebellion began to be seen for what it truly was: genius ahead of its time. In the 1970 and 1980, when the electric blues revival took hold, young players rediscovered his catalog. Musicians like Paul Butterfield, Charlie Musselwhite, and James Cotton, men who had shared stages or grown up listening to him, carried his techniques into a new era. Every amplified harmonica solo, every raw, distorted note in a blues club across the world could be traced back to Little Walter. In 1995, his signature song, Juke, was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, honored as one of the 500 songs that shaped rock and roll. It also found a place in the Grammy Hall of Fame, a permanent recognition that his influence had outlived the man himself. That same year, the best of Little Walter entered Rolling Stone magazine's list of the 500 greatest albums of all time, standing alongside legends like Miles Davis, the Beatles, and Bob Dylan. For those who knew the truth, the pain, the anger, the loneliness, these honors felt bittersweet. Walter had never been invited to the industry's inner circle. He didn't walk red carpets or smile for magazine covers. Yet decades later, his sound had become the foundation of the very music that once left him behind. Then, in 2008, Hollywood came calling. Director Darnell Martin released Cadillac Records, a film that told the story of chess records and the men and women who built its sound. Actor Columbus Short played Little Walter with a depth that stunned audiences. He captured not just the fire, but the fragility, the haunted look of a man who couldn't separate his art from his pain. Many viewers believed Short deserved an Oscar for the role. For a new generation, the film was an introduction. For older fans, it was a reminder, a chance to give Walter the recognition he'd been denied in life. Through that movie, people who had never heard of the Chicago Blues suddenly knew his name. Today, Little Walter's music still plays in bars, in films, in the hearts of musicians chasing that perfect tone. Every harmonica player who plugs into an amp owes him something. Every band that dares to mix distortion with emotion walks a path he cleared decades ago. He was reckless, flawed, and sometimes impossible to love, but that's what made him human and what made his music unforgettable. Little Walter never lived to see how far his sound would travel, how many lives it would touch. Yet even now, when the first note of juke hits the air, you can still feel him there, a restless soul who turned pain into melody and silence into song. Some stars burn out fast, others never fade at all. His harmonica still cries through time, reminding us that brilliance often comes at a cost and that the blues, at its core, is just the truth set to rhythm. In the end, Little Walter's story feels less like a biography and more like a song, one that begins with fire, rises with brilliance, and fades into silence far too soon. He was a boy who ran from Louisiana with a harmonica in his pocket and a dream no one could see. He became the sound of a city, the heartbeat of an era, and the proof that genius doesn't ask for permission. His life burned bright, wild, and defiant, and though it ended in tragedy, his music still hums like an echo beneath the floorboards of American history. Listen to Juke, even now, and you can still hear the fight in his breath, that mix of joy and pain, hope and defiance. Each note feels like a confession, a reminder that art is often born where comfort ends. Hollywood gave him a second life through Cadillac Records, but the truth of Little Walter can't be contained in a film reel. His legacy lives in every musician who dares to break the rules, every performer who plays like it's the last night on earth. He showed the world that a harmonica, a simple, pocket-sized instrument, could roar like thunder, could whisper like heartbreak, could bridge the gap between a juke joint in Chicago and a concert hall in London. He made the blues electric, but more than that, he made it eternal. If you listen closely, you'll realize his story isn't just about music. It's about the human condition, about how brilliance can rise from poverty, how beauty can survive in chaos, and how even the shortest lives can leave the deepest mark. So the next time you hear that first note of "My Babe" or "Juke," close your eyes for a moment. Picture the smoke, the crowd, the young man in a sharp suit, holding a harmonica like it was a prayer. Because somewhere, in that sound, Little Walter still lives. If this story moved you, if it reminded you why these legends matter, please like, comment, and subscribe to Stars Underrated. Let's keep giving these forgotten voices their flowers while we still can. Some stars fade from view. Others, like Little Walter, shine forever even from the shadows.